In example 3, we're going to graph a hyperbola now in its general form. So first thing we have to do is we have to rearrange our x squareds and our y squareds and group them with the corresponding x and the corresponding y. We also have to move this 13 over to the right-hand side. Since my x squared is the one that's negative, that's the one that's going to have to go second. Remember, with my hyperbola, I should be subtracting my x squared and my y squared terms. So let's start grouping. I have my 4y squared plus 8y that I'm going to group together. And then I have my minus x squared and my 2x here. And I'm going to add that 13 over to the other side. Then what I'm going to do in front of my y squareds, I have to factor out this 4. So the next thing I'm going to do is factor out my 4. I'm also going to leave room to complete that square. So if I take the 4 out in front, I end up with y squared plus 2y, and I'm going to leave room for whatever I need to add in there. And the reason I didn't put the parentheses around my x squared and my x term is because I have to be very careful with this negative sign. I'm actually going to think about factoring out that negative, and that's going to affect both the x squared and the x term. So I'm going to take that negative out in front. That leaves me with a positive x squared inside the parentheses and a minus 2x inside the parentheses. Then I'm going to leave room to add in what I need. And then whatever I add to the left-hand side, I have to add the same thing to the right-hand side. So as I complete this square, I need to leave two sides, or two things to add on that right-hand side. Then I need to figure out what I'm adding to complete that square. I'm going to take my middle value, that b value, I'm going to divide it by 2, and I'm going to square it to get this number. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 1 squared is 1. So inside here, I'm adding 1. Same thing over here. I have 2 divided by 2. Squaring that will also give me 1. And then I need to think about what I'm actually adding to this side. So because the 1 is here and I have that 4 outside, remember those are being multiplied together. So I've added a total of 4 to this side, which means I have to add a total of 4 to the other side. So this is a plus 4 over here. And then with the x's, I added a 1 inside, but I have to remember there's a negative on the outside. So I'm actually adding negative 1 altogether, which means I need to add a negative 1 on the right-hand side. Now I can go and complete my square. So I'm going to end up with 4 times y plus 1 squared. And that's coming from taking the square root of y squared gives me y, and taking the square root of 1 gives me 1. And I always use the first sign that I have in here down here. Then I have minus x minus 1 squared. Again, square root of x squared is x. I take the sign, this first sign here, and then the square root of 1 is 1. And then if I add up what's over on that right-hand side, I get 13 plus 4 minus 1, which will give me 16. Then I have to go through and I have to divide everything by 16 to get my right-hand side to be 1. And I simplify. So I end up with y plus 1 squared over 4 minus x minus 1 squared over 16 equal to 1. And from here I can graph it just like I graphed the other ones that I was working with today. So starting out, I need my center. So my center, my h and my k, remember this time my y and my x are switched around. My h always comes from within my x, so my h is 1, and my k is negative 1. So I have a center of 1, negative 1. Then I need to find my a and my b values. My a value always comes from the very first fraction. So my a value is coming from the 4, and the square root of that is 2. So I know a is 2. And my b value is coming from the square root of the second fraction, so the square root of that 16, which is 4. And since my y's is first, my transverse axis, if I look at the equations on the front, it tells me my my transverse axis is going to be vertical in this case. And it's 2 times my A value, so 2 times 2, which is 4. And my conjugate axis is going to be horizontal, and it's 2 times my B value, or 2 times 4, which is 8. So if we go ahead and graph this, we'll start with our center, which is at 1, -1. And then we'll go ahead and graph our imaginary rectangular box. So with our transverse axis, we're going 2 up and 2 down. And our conjugate axis, we're going 4 in either direction. And then we'll get our rectangular box drawn in with our dotted lines. And then our asymptotes go on those diagonals. So from the center through the corners is our asymptotes. And since this one is opening up and down, we can draw in our hyperbola, one going up and one going down. If you have questions, let me know.